LSU football literally had one job in the spring transfer portal window, and they haven't been able to do that.
You are Locked On LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, y'all? Welcome into Locked On LSU. Thank you for making us your first listen every single day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. So hit that subscribe button, like, comment, rate, review, subscribe, all that great stuff. Always appreciate you for making us your first listen every single day, and always appreciate you for interacting with the podcast. I want to get into the one job that LSU had this offseason, and right now they are failing that job. But before we get into that, I got to let y'all know that today's edition of Locked On LSU is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I mean, we've got to talk more about Monopoly Go. This fast-paced game lets you team up with friends for tournaments to unlock awesome prizes like unique stickers for trading, cool playing pieces, and hilarious emojis for taunting your friends. So download Monopoly Go now free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. The one job that LSU football had in this offseason, in the spring transfer portal window, was to find a starting defensive tackle to go alongside Jacobian Guillory. And LSU has had several targets in this spring transfer portal window. But they haven't been able to land a single one. And I talked last week about a nightmare scenario. We're currently living that nightmare scenario. The thing that we've been talking about for weeks and months, that it is a non-negotiable for LSU to get a certified starter and ideally a game changer and difference maker in the spring transfer portal window to plug into that defensive tackle spot, starting defensive tackle spot. So far, 0 for 3. So before we get into what comes next, let's do a little bit of a recap. LSU targeted 3 starting caliber defensive tackles in the transfer portal. Their previous targets: one, Philip Bleedy, defensive tackle out of Indiana, who spent a few years at Texas Tech before then. He committed to Auburn, and that was about a week or so ago. So we knew that Philip Bleedy was off the table. So once Philip Bleedy committed to Auburn, then LSU put the full court press onto 2 separate guys. One, Dominic Williams, the defensive tackle out of TCU, one of the top defensive line prospects in this transfer portal window, probably the top defensive tackle transfer on the market. He committed to Oklahoma. If you remember a video that went viral after his visit at LSU last weekend, it was at Supper Club, and they were, carrying around the fireworks and the sign and, welcome to Baton Rouge, Dominic. It was a little cringe. It was not a little, it was super cringe. He's committed to Oklahoma. Simeon Barrow was the other player that LSU was really putting the full court press on. Dominic Williams committed to Oklahoma on Thursday. So that's when I thought, okay, it's now all on Simeon Barrow. Put all your chips in the middle. It is the Simeon Barrow show from now until ideally he commits to LSU. But over the weekend, it was announced that Simeon Barrow will commit to Miami. 0 for 3 on 3 certified starting defensive tackles and the 3 top targets in the transfer portal. So a question that I think is fair to ask ourselves is, why didn't those players commit to LSU? That was one question that several of you brought to my attention on Twitter. You commented on the last video on YouTube. Why not LSU? Why are these players going other places if we are supposedly had the best defensive line duo of coaches in all of college football in Bo Davis and Kevin Peoples? My answer to that question, and my answer to a lot of your questions that may come up throughout the next, for the foreseeable future about why didn't this player decide to go to LSU? Every player's story is different. Do you want to stay close to home? Do you like the coaching staff? Is there a clear path to you to start? Obviously, for any defensive tackle target in this transfer portal window, there's a clear and obvious path to starting because there's no other option. But my answer to that question, for this instance, and also really kind of an overarching question for any player that does or does not decide to come to LSU, it's NIL. And it's not that LSU doesn't have the NIL money. It's not that LSU is not willing to put the NIL money forward. It's that everything that I've heard is that LSU has a price, not just for these specific targets, but for players in general, that LSU the collective, they have a price, and they're not willing to go over that price to accommodate an individual player. That these three players in Philip Bleedy, Dominic Williams, Simeon Barrow, they likely got heftier NIL packages elsewhere. And I'm sure that there are other factors involved with it as well of, the coaching staff. Do you get along with the current players on the team? Do you have just a better vibe, a better fit on your visit? Always those things are going to come into play. But if there's an asking price that LSU isn't willing to match, then that player's not going to come to LSU. Now, I think that's a double-edged sword there. I like it and I don't like it, or I'm apprehensive about it. Not that I don't like it, I'm apprehensive about it. In one way, I do like it because I like that LSU is saying, no, this is our price, take it or leave it. That these are our boundaries. This is what we are willing to offer you, and if you're not willing to take it, then so be it. I do admire the fact that LSU is not willing to bend or break for any individual player. That's a very Patriots approach to thing that no one player is bigger than the team. Because once you start making concessions and once you start breaking your own rules for one player, you're going to start doing it for several players. And that's when you start to kind of facilitate an unhealthy and unsustainable culture within a locker room of, this guy got X number of dollars or this guy got X number of dollars. No, if you are setting up boundaries, stick to them. But that's also understanding that if you're going to have strict boundaries of what you're willing to pay in NIL, you're going to have to live with missing out on some of these top targets. That's just the reality of the world that we're living in. In an NIL world where there is no salary cap, in an NIL world where you can literally throw whatever you want at a certain player, you're going to lose out on some of these battles if you're not willing to go above a certain asking price. Now, I don't mind that. Again, I don't mind that, but also understand that you're going to miss out on some of these players. And I do have to ask, could now the situation that you're in, where you feel like you could have a championship caliber offense with a booty defense, is now the time to maybe bend and break and sweeten the pot a little bit and add an extra 10, 20, 30, 40, $50,000 in the NIL pot just to push it over the edge to help you construct a team that could be built to make a run in the college football playoff. So it's a little bit of a give and take there. So it's not that LSU is not willing to offer the NIL. They're willing to offer NIL. It's not that LSU doesn't have the money to offer, because they do have the money to offer. It's that it didn't align with these three defensive tackles. But I think there's one thing that just simply cannot be overstated. Cannot be overstated. And I'll get into that coming up next after just a couple of words from our sponsors. Okay, I want to tell you about LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. So that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. And one of the great things is that LinkedIn is not just another job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals that you cannot find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job but could be open for the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, then you're looking in the wrong place. I worked for a radio station, and about a year or so back, one of our producers left in the middle of football season. Obviously, super busy season for his sports talk radio station. We went to LinkedIn, and actually the candidate that we ended up hiring said, "I'm really glad that you reached out via LinkedIn, because I didn't look at any other job boards. I was exclusively using LinkedIn for my job search, and we found the perfect candidate with LinkedIn." And LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and might not have the time or resources to hire, so they're constantly finding ways to make the process easier. Take it from my experience. It was incredibly easy, and LinkedIn had the perfect tools for us to help help us find the perfect candidate. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That is linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, rolling along here, Locked On LSU. Thank you for making us your first listen every single day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Do you have to turn down the volume with all of that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today. It's a free 24/7 streaming channel programmed for you every single day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Rolling along here, Locked On LSU. Of the three defensive tackle targets that LSU was focusing in on this spring transfer portal window, they all have committed elsewhere. I mentioned before the break there was one thing that absolutely positively cannot be overstated. That I cannot say this enough. And it's not comfortable to say, and it's not going to be comfortable to hear. The fact that you missed out on all of those defensive tackles is really bad. Like, I cannot even emphasize how bad that is, how bad of a sign that is for this team, how bad of an indication of that, of what that could mean for this defense. That this is really bad and not a good sign for this team. Now, it's not bad that everybody hates Brian Kelly. That's not what I'm saying. It's not bad that, maybe this defensive coaching staff isn't as good as we thought. Not that. I don't believe that it is that, because I'm not going to think that just because three of these potential defensive tackles, decided to go elsewhere over LSU's, that all of a sudden that's a bad sign about your coaching staff and what people think about your coaching staff. That's not what I'm saying. It's a bad, it's bad for what this team can do this season, frankly. That, let's be honest, it's an uncomfortable truth. But your defense will not be very good if you do not get another starting tackle in the transfer portal. A solid, I mean, at this point, I will settle for just a starter, because that's where you are at this point. And I know that you've got Jacobian Guillory, and I'm excited about Jacobian Guillory because this coaching staff has given us every reason to be excited about Jacobian Guillory and the strides that he made in spring practice and the role that he is carving out for himself on the defensive line. And I know that you've also got Jalen Lee. I know that you've also got Sean Washington, the JUCO transfer. I know that you've got Dominic McKinley coming in for his freshman season. I know that you moved Kimo Makanole from the offensive line to the defensive line. I know that LSU landed Gio Paez in the transfer portal, the transfer from Wisconsin. I know that you've got bodies. I know that there are guys on the roster that can play defensive tackle. I understand that. But all of those guys were on the roster when Brian Kelly told the media, told all of us, that defensive tackle was their number one priority. And really, at that point, their only priority in the transfer portal. That speaks loud volumes to me. Because a lot of coaches, a lot of times, coaches, players, they can beat around the bush. They can try and, disguise things. They can try and blow smoke and make things look a lot more optimistic than they really are. But Brian Kelly told you point blank, we are looking for defensive tackles. That they did not feel comfortable with where that position was at. Did any of us feel comfortable with where that position was at? Were any of us surprised with that Brian Kelly said, no, we're looking for defensive tackles. That's really like the only thing we're looking for in the transfer portal. And I know things change, but that's an indication to me that they do not feel comfortable at all with where this position group is at. So when Brian Kelly says that's our number one priority this offseason, and you go 0 for 3 with 3 of your top targets, that's concerning. That's incredibly concerning. Because we know how detrimental a bad defense can be to a good team. We saw it this past season. You had a championship caliber offense, the top offense in the country, with a Heisman Trophy winning quarterback, with the best wide receiver tandem in all of college football. You had one that led in receiving yards and the other that led in receiving touchdowns. All three of them went in the first round of the draft. Like, I don't have to tell you this. You're one of the top offensive lines in the country. But you still found yourself in the ReliaQuest Bowl. No disrespect to the ReliaQuest Bowl. But you still found yourself 9-3 in the regular season, missing out on a bid to the SEC championship game and to the college football playoff because your defense was horrendous. Why am I supposed to think that it's going to be any better this season? I know that we feel like the defensive coaching staff has upgraded. But as I've said before, and as I will continue to reiterate, I don't care how good of a coach you are. You're not a magician. And you can't make something out of nothing. You cannot make an All-American SEC defensive tackle out of what you currently have on this roster. At least I'm not going to count on that because hope is not a strategy. And I cannot hope that Dominic McKinley comes in his freshman season and he's able to contribute just like that right away. That's not fair to him. I cannot hope that Sean Washington is going to show up and make that leap from the JUCO level to the SEC level and be a consistent starter, game changer, reliable player for you. I can't hope for that. I can't hope that Kimo Makanele is going to be able to make that move from the offensive line to the defensive line so seamlessly that he is your consistent starter. I cannot hope for that because you need talent. Of course, you need depth. You need options. You have a few options here, but Brian Kelly told you need more of them. So I cannot just hope that someone on this roster is able to break out and make a massive difference. I cannot continue to hope for that. So it's uncomfortable right now looking at where this position group is at. It's uncomfortable and honestly nausea-inducing thinking about this defense wasting yet another elite offense if the offense does turn out to be as good as I think it can be. I know that this offense has undergone a whole lot of changes, but I think it can be pretty darn good. We know that this league is won and lost in the trenches. That's why it's such a big deal. And that's why I'm so excited about this offense is because you are solid in the trenches. Is because your bookends are probably both going to be first round picks. I think Will Campbell will be a top 5 pick in this upcoming NFL draft. And I don't think that's a hot take in the slightest. So if you feel great about your offensive line, I think that it would be intellectually dishonest to say, well, we feel great about our offense because of the offensive line, but who cares about the defensive line? It's not going to be a big deal. We'll just put Gio Paez in there and it's going to be no big deal. No, it doesn't work like that. This league is won and lost in the trenches. And you can win in the trenches offensively. I don't know how great I feel about you being able to win in the trenches defensively. So who else is out there? Who else could be an option for LSU to pursue now that their top 3 options have already decided to go elsewhere? We'll break down 2 names to keep an eye on, and we'll do that coming up next after just a few words from our sponsors. Okay, I want to tell you about Monopoly Go. All right, game off. Okay, we got to pause here to talk more about Monopoly Go. And I know what you're saying, flag on the play. You already talked about that. But there is just so much good stuff in this game that I've got to tell you about it again. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for timed tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock. And there is so much to get. There's unique stickers that you can trade with friends to complete albums for big prizes. There's cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with. There's hilarious emojis for taunting your friends when you smash their buildings or you heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every single day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their own unique mini games like digging for treasure or a robot pachinko machine, and there's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzies. There's also something fun to discover in Monopoly Go, so get off the bench and go download it now free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. All right, rolling along here, Locked On LSU. Thanks again for making us your first listen every single day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And coming up in tomorrow's edition of Locked On LSU, I hate that I wasn't able to address baseball today because what a massive series win over the weekend against number 1 ranked Texas A&M. We'll do a full deep dive into baseball coming up on tomorrow's edition of Locked On LSU. But now we're focusing on the defensive tackles, since over the weekend it was announced that Dominic Williams and Simeon Barrow, the defensive tackles from TCU and Michigan State respectively, 2 top targets in the transfer portal for LSU to fill their number 1 needed defensive tackle, they've committed to Oklahoma and Miami respectively. So who else is available? Like, you're not going to stop looking for D tackles. Just because your top targets are off the board doesn't mean that it's like, oh, well, oh, well, we tried. No, you're going to keep going to try and find that defensive tackle that's going to be able to be, a 1-2 punch with Jacobian Guillory. One name to keep an eye on is Aiden Huntington, the defensive tackle out of ULM. Now, he's originally from Virginia. He's a 2-star recruit coming out of high school, but a 3-star transfer. He's 6'1", 280 pounds. A little bit on the smaller side for what you would want to see in an SEC defensive tackle. You'd like to see him closer to 300, maybe a little bit more height. But as long as, if he's on the slighter side, can he move quickly? Can he use that at least to his advantage? Now, Aiden Huntington spent 3 years at Kent State before transferring to UL Monroe. Now, that means, 4-year starter, has only 1 year of eligibility remaining with the COVID year. So that's not what I love when you're looking for guys in the transfer portal, that they would only come in for 1 year and then you're back to to square one trying to fill that position again. I would normally like to focus in on transfers that have several years of eligibility, so they're more a part of your vision moving forward rather than just 1 year plug and play and then on to the next the following year. But again, like, you're gonna have to figure it out somehow. Like, you're going to have to lower your standards a little bit. Maybe your perfect transfer has all of these boxes that you'd like to be checked, but these transfers aren't going to be able to check all of them just because you're desperate, frankly. So 1 year of eligibility remaining for Aiden Huntington. Pretty solid year this past season. Played in 11 games, tallied 62 total tackles, 8.5 sacks. It's a pretty impressive number, especially considering that one of those sacks came against Ole Miss in their matchup with Ole Miss this past season. Now, they got absolutely obliterated by Ole Miss. I think it was like a 30, 40-point game there. But still, I mean, like, that's an SEC offensive line. That's what you would expect to see from him week in and week out if he did decide to come to LSU. So 8.5 sacks, 3 forced fumbles, and 2 pass breakups this past season. So don't love the size. Don't love that those stats came in the Sun Belt. Let's be honest. The level of play in the Sun Belt is drastically different than the level of play and what's expected of you in the SEC. Just ask Sunbelt Billy, who's struggling a little bit at Florida. So I don't love that either. It's going to be a massive leap to the level of play and what's expected of him. Like, you're going from being a starter at ULM, now you're a starter at LSU. So don't love that. But again, like, you need bodies. You need starters. And if Aiden Huntington can be that for you, if he can be a starter, if he can, if he can just disrupt things, if he can get to the quarterback, that's all I'm going to ask him to do. So that's one name to keep an eye on. Hearing a lot of rumblings, a lot of smoke coming out about Aiden Huntington. And he's at least a kid with Louisiana ties. I know he's from Virginia, but he spent this past season in the state of Louisiana. And of course, we know that is a priority of Brian Kelly and this entire coaching staff. Second name to keep an eye on. Now, this is a guy that we talked about a few weeks ago at the beginning of the transfer portal window, but then we all kind of directed our attention over toward Philip Bleedy, who's now at Auburn, Dominic Williams, who's now at Oklahoma, Simeon Barrow, who's now at Miami. Kind of took the full court press off of CJ West, but now, surprise, you need him again. CJ West, the transfer out of Kent State, spent the past 4 years at Kent State, 3-year starter. Redshirted his freshman season. He's an Illinois native, but 3-star transfer. Was a 3-star recruit coming out of high school, is a 3-star transfer as well, 6'2", 315 pounds. Now, that's a little bit more of the beef that we were looking for. That you don't necessarily get an Aiden Huntington, but 300-plus pounder, that's thick. Like, as long as he can move, that's thick, and you're going to want that beef in the trenches. In 2023, he played in all 12 games. Now, Kent State, pretty brutal season this past year, but played in all 12 games, tallied 40 total tackles, 2 sacks, and 1 forced fumble. Now, the numbers aren't as attractive as they are for Aiden Huntington, but I'm not going to box score scout, and nor am I going to act like I watched Kent State football at all this season. So I can't say, well, he did this or he did this and didn't show up in this game, but did show up in this game. But the size is, I think, what's most appealing to me. Here's the red flag here. Maybe not a red flag, the caveat here with CJ West. He graduates from Kent State this upcoming spring, but he does not graduate until August. So you would not be able to get CJ West into the building and acclimated into this defense, acclimated with the rest of this team until August at the earliest. That's cutting it a little close. That's cutting a little close for comfort because you're going to have to learn a new defense. You're going to have to learn new terminology. You're going to have to vibe with the rest of the defensive line. Let's not forget that this is not just, one position, go out there and play it. Like, this is getting adjusted and gelling with an entire unit. Can you do that in the matter of a month? I guess you can, absolutely, but I do have a little bit of concern, a little bit of pause there. CJ West, the transfer out of Kent State, Aiden Huntington, the transfer out of ULM. Keep your eyes and ears on those two. And of course, we will keep our eyes and ears on those two players and the rest of the transfer portal here at Locked On LSU. So keep it locked on LSU as we continue to keep you updated with transfer portal targets for LSU football throughout the rest of the offseason. Coming up on tomorrow's edition, a full breakdown of LSU baseball LSU baseball hosting Texas A&M. What a massive, massive, and pivotal series win for LSU this past weekend. All of that coming up on tomorrow's edition of Locked On LSU.